The phone rang just as I was settling into my chair, the weight of the receiver familiar in my hand. I answered, expecting a routine check-in, maybe a reminder about a renewal date. Instead, my lawyer's voice came through tight and unusually direct. A small stir of unease ran through me before he even explained why he was calling. Something in the air around me felt like it shifted, quiet but sharp. And then he told me there was a document he'd been asked to rush to my house for signature. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully, and said my daughter had contacted him earlier, insisting that I sign quickly before I forget. The phrase landed hard, like someone dropping a stone in still water. Forget. I had no memory issues, no diagnosis, no confusion beyond what age naturally allows. Hearing him repeat her words made the room feel smaller. It wasn't the request that unsettled me. It was the way she framed it, as if I had already lost something I knew I still had. My lawyer's voice lowered again, almost to a whisper, as if he didn't want the wrong person to overhear. He said she had been unusually pushy, calling twice within the hour. As he spoke, I heard faint voices in his background, muffled at first, then sharper. I recognized my daughter's tone before the words were clear. She was arguing with her husband, insisting they don't have time for delays. The tension in their voices slipped through the line like an uninvited truth. I sat up straighter, pressing the phone closer to my ear. My lawyer stopped mid-sentence, likely realizing I could hear them too, and then he spoke with a steadiness that carried more concern than his words revealed. "Don't sign anything until we meet," he said. "No panic, no drama, just a quiet instruction from a man who knew more than he was ready to say over the phone." When the call ended, the house fell into a heavy silence. A message arrived on my phone within seconds. My daughter's name lit up the screen, followed by a line that hollowed me out. "Dad, I'll stop by tonight, we need paperwork done." No explanation, no context, no warmth, just pressure disguised as routine. I set the phone down slowly and looked around my living room as if it might offer answers. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt different. Whatever was coming had already started moving long before the call reached me. And for the first time in a long while I felt the weight of someone else's intentions pressing in from the edges of my quiet life. I spent the afternoon moving slowly through the house, letting the lawyer's warning settle into the corners of my thoughts. The quiet made it easier to hear the things I'd been ignoring. Losing my wife had left a wide space in my life, one I never expected anyone else to fill. In the months that followed, I found myself relying on small bits of help: a ride to the store, a hand with heavy groceries, reminders about appointments. I didn't think much of it at the time. Grief softens a man's edges, and help feels easier to accept when you're tired. My daughter stepped into that space quickly, almost too quickly now that I look back. At first, it seemed like kindness. She offered to sort my mail, manage the bills, even speak to service companies so I wouldn't have to wait on hold. She framed everything as easing my burden. But somewhere along the way the tone changed. Her updates became instructions, her suggestions became decisions, and my voice seemed to matter a little less with each passing week. Her husband started appearing more often too, always polite, always smiling, just a little too long. He hovered near the edges of conversations, watching details the way a man watches a door he plans to use later. Back then, I told myself it was normal. Family stepping in to help an aging man adjust to a new life. Today, that explanation didn't feel as solid. I remembered the first time she asked about my accounts. It had come up casually, slipped into a conversation about retirement planning. But the questions were oddly specific, focused on access and totals, not general advice. I brushed it off, trusting the daughter I raised. Yet now, with the morning's call still echoing in my mind, those questions felt sharper than I let myself admit. There were moments when she answered questions directed at me, speaking before I had the chance, as if my words might complicate things. She would laugh it off, claiming she knew what I meant. I didn't argue, thinking she was just adjusting to her new role in my life. But thinking back on her timing, how quickly she moved into responsibilities I never actually handed her, the air around those memories felt heavier. The lawyer's warning had shifted the whole picture. What I once saw as care now carried the outline of something else. The softness of her concern, the steady presence of her husband, the little choices I never questioned, they all took on a new shape. And for the first time, I wondered how much of their help was for me, and how much was for something they hadn't said aloud yet. My daughter arrived the next afternoon carrying a neat stack of papers pressed against her chest, smiling as if it were all a simple favor. She said they were routine insurance updates, and that signing them now would save me trouble later. I didn't reach for a pen right away. Something in the way she stood, shoulders too stiff, eyes too focused, made me look at the papers a little longer than usual. When I flipped through the stack, a photocopy of my signature stared back at me from one of the pages. I hadn't signed anything recently, and I certainly hadn't given anyone permission to use an old signature. My hand went still on the paper, the room seeming to quiet around me. I traced the edge of the page with my thumb, keeping my voice calm as I asked her why it was already signed. She blinked too quickly and said the insurance office must have auto-filled it from past forms. The explanation didn't match her tone. Another page caught my attention for a different reason. The signature line, still blank, had the faintest outline beneath it, as though someone had traced the shape of a signature in pencil before erasing it. The impression was light, but it was there. I lifted the paper slightly and saw the shallow grooves against the light. I didn't comment right away. Instead, I asked what the form was for. She sighed, acting hurt, insisting she was just trying to take things off my plate. Her husband wandered into the living room then, claiming he was looking for a pen. But his eyes weren't searching drawers or counters. They were scanning shelves, glancing at envelopes, taking in things people don't need to notice while hunting for ink. He lingered near my desk a moment too long, fingers brushing the corner of a folder before he straightened up quickly when he noticed me watching. Later that evening, I stepped outside to bring in the mail, but my porch mailbox was nearly empty. Only a flyer remained. A neighbor passing by mentioned casually that he saw my daughter earlier, leaving with a folder she'd pulled from the box. He assumed she was helping me sort mail again. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice steady, thanking him without showing anything else. That night, I set up a small pile of blank folders in a drawer just for copies. From then on, anything she handed me went through my copier first. If papers were becoming a tool in whatever plan was forming around me, I needed to know every mark and every line before they left my hands again. The next morning, I slipped the stack of insurance documents into a folder and drove to my lawyer's office without telling anyone. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that sharpens your thoughts instead of settling them. When he saw the papers, he didn't speak at first. He scanned the pages with a slow, practiced eye, and the longer he looked, the heavier the silence in the room became. I felt a small pulse of dread forming in my chest. He set the papers down and rested a hand on the top sheet. They weren't insurance documents at all. The forms were disguised with familiar headers, but buried inside were clauses granting property access and authority rights, permissions no one should slip into a stack without explanation. I sat back in my chair, letting the truth land. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. He opened a digital copy they had emailed earlier and checked the document history. Edits had been made late at night from a device that wasn't mine. He didn't say who he suspected, but the look he gave me made his thoughts clear. Before I left, he told me to keep everything exactly as it came and to avoid signing anything under pressure. On the drive home, my phone buzzed twice with messages from my daughter, insisting the forms were urgent for tax reasons and needed to be handled soon. The timing was too clean, too aligned with the morning's discovery. I didn't reply. Later in the afternoon, my son-in-law happened to be over when the bank called to verify a routine detail. Before I could answer a simple question, he stepped closer, speaking for me as if I wasn't standing right there. His tone carried a confidence no son-in-law should have when dealing with another man's accounts. The banker hesitated, then clarified that she needed my confirmation only. The moment hung awkwardly until he backed away with a forced smile. His eyes, however, didn't match the smile. That small exchange told me more than any stack of papers could. They weren't guessing, they were coordinating. Step by step, they were trying to build a path that started with my signature and ended with control I never agreed to give. That night I gathered every important document I owned, titles, policies, deeds, and placed them in a locked drawer I hadn't used in years. I felt the weight of the key in my hand longer than I should have before hiding it somewhere only I would think to look. The paper trail wasn't just suspicious anymore. It was a warning, and I was finally ready to follow it with both eyes open. They showed up after dark, knocking with the kind of urgency people usually reserve for emergencies. When I opened the door, my daughter pushed past me with a tight smile, holding another stack of papers clipped together too neatly. Her husband followed, trying to look relaxed, but his eyes kept darting around the room. They said the paperwork was time-sensitive and had to be signed before some vague deadline. Their voices carried a strain they couldn't hide, a mix of nerves and pressure that didn't fit the calm story they were trying to sell. I sat down slowly while they hovered nearby, their hands fidgeting in small, restless movements. My daughter placed the stack on the table in front of me, flipping immediately to a page with a blank signature line. She talked quickly, explaining nothing, just repeating phrases like routine updates and simple housekeeping. I didn't pick up the pen. Instead, I listened as they stepped into the kitchen, thinking the walls were thicker than they were. Their voices came through low at first, but the words carried clearly enough. My daughter whispered, "He signs anything if you guide him." Her husband's answer came out sharper, annoyed that I hadn't already grabbed the pen. The sound of their quiet planning hit harder than I expected. Hearing it stripped away any illusion that this was about helping me. It felt like standing on the edge of a truth I should have seen weeks ago. When they returned, Her husband leaned closer than necessary, distracting me with questions about my health, acting concerned while his eyes kept flicking toward the paper. My daughter slid another page toward me, tapping the signature line with her finger. That's when I noticed it, one paragraph buried halfway down the page, written in careful legal language. It was a transfer clause granting access and control over my home, for management purposes. The wording was slick, but the intent was unmistakable. My hand tightened on the arm of my chair. He asked again, this time with an edge in his voice, why I was hesitating. The politeness had slipped. His tone carried an impatience that brushed against hostility, as if my refusal to sign was somehow unreasonable. My daughter kept pushing the pen toward me, her smile thin and strained. I leaned back and let the moment stretch. Their plan wasn't subtle anymore. They weren't waiting for trust. They were pressing for control. The house, my property, my life, wrapped inside a stack of papers they hoped I'd sign without reading. That was the moment everything crystallized. They weren't trying to protect me. They were trying to take what I built. I met my lawyer and financial advisor early the next morning, long before my daughter would think to check in. We sat in a small conference room with the blinds half closed, the kind of space built for quiet, serious conversations. My lawyer handled the documents first, flipping through them with slow, deliberate movements. My advisor watched silently, his expression tightening with each page he read. The room felt heavier with every passing minute, as if the walls understood what was unfolding. When they finished, my advisor leaned forward and lowered his voice. He told me my daughter had contacted his office days earlier, asking for access to my financial records. She claimed she needed to organize things, but she wasn't on any authorization list. His team denied the request, and she grew irritated, pushing harder than expected. Hearing that confirmed what I already feared. She wasn't just preparing, she was moving. And she was doing it behind my back. My lawyer slid the papers toward me and explained the pattern he'd seen in similar cases. It often began with disguised forms, harmless on the surface, dangerous in the fine print. A forged signature here, a pressured signature there. Once the wrong line was signed, control shifted quietly, and undoing it became a long, uphill battle. Hearing him map it out with such calm clarity sent a cold ripple through my chest. Everything he described mirrored the steps she had already taken. My advisor added that one misplaced signature could give someone temporary authority, which they could then use to access accounts, change beneficiaries, or redirect assets. He wasn't trying to scare me, he was stating facts. But the truth was enough to make my pulse sharpen. They weren't just trying to help, they were trying to position themselves to take control the moment I slipped. My lawyer then laid out what needed to happen immediately. Secure accounts, freeze credit. Set up alerts for any attempted access. Restrict who could speak on my behalf. He urged me to create barriers they couldn't bypass without my explicit consent. I agreed to everything without hesitation. Within an hour, we had locked down every account, filed protective notes, and placed safeguards around my documents. As the meeting wrapped up, my lawyer looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen in years. "They'll push harder when they realize you're resisting," he said. His words weren't dramatic. They were a warning shaped by experience. I walked out of that office knowing the stakes had changed. Whatever they were planning wasn't finished. But now I was no longer standing in the dark. I called my daughter that afternoon with a steady voice and told her I was ready to finish the paperwork. The words tasted like metal, but they had the effect I expected. She agreed too quickly, her tone bright in a way that didn't match the situation. I kept my voice calm, almost casual, telling her to come by that evening. The moment the call ended, I reached for my jacket pocket, checking the folder of copies I had prepared, thick enough to carry truth, thin enough to conceal. My lawyer and advisor were already in the neighborhood, waiting in a nearby car with the evidence. They didn't want to be inside the house, not yet. They preferred stepping in only when the time was right, when the truth could be shown without confusion. Their presence just blocks away gave me a quiet anchor in the rising tension. They arrived right at dusk. My daughter walked through the door with a smile that didn't touch her eyes, carrying a small stack of papers as if she were presenting a gift. She spoke quickly, telling me we had a lot to get through, and that it was best to sign before the deadlines passed. Her impatience sat just below the surface, enough to betray how close she thought she was to the finish line. Her husband lingered behind her, offering a polite greeting before drifting toward my desk. He scanned the mail tray, glanced at the drawers, touched the corners of envelopes with a casualness that wasn't casual at all. I watched him from the edge of my vision, taking in each small movement. He was searching, hunting for anything they might have missed or anything I might have hidden. I kept one hand near my jacket, the folder resting against my side like a quiet promise. Every step they'd taken, the forged pages, the rehearsed lines, the pressure, was inside those copies. As they moved around the living room, the air felt tighter, like the space had shrunk around the truth waiting to break open. A soft knock came at the door before they arrived. A neighbor checking in, someone who had known me and my wife for years. He mentioned offhand that he'd overheard my daughter telling someone, "After tonight, things will change." He didn't think much of it, but I felt the words land like a closing latch. As the evening settled around us, my daughter laid the papers on the table with quiet confidence. Everything in her posture said she thought she was moments from success. I sat across from her, hands steady, heart firm, waiting for the right moment to let everything unravel. I led them into the living room with the same calm I used when hosting guests years ago. The papers they brought sat on the table between us, stacked too neatly, like a trap waiting to be sprung. I told them we would go through everything together, page by page. My daughter nodded quickly, already reaching for the pen in her bag, her confidence steady and untroubled. Her husband leaned back in his chair, arms loose, but his eyes tracked every movement I made. Before she could hand me the first page, footsteps sounded from the hallway. Slow, controlled, unmistakably deliberate. My lawyer appeared first, followed by my advisor, both stepping into the room with quiet purpose. My daughter's face drained of color, and her husband straightened in his seat as if bracing for impact. Neither of them had expected witnesses, much less these witnesses. I didn't raise my voice or posture. I simply reached into my jacket and placed the folder on the table. Inside were copies of every document they had brought me over the past weeks. Signatures traced in pencil, lines altered, titles disguised. I opened them slowly, letting each page speak for itself. My daughter's breath caught, a small sharp sound she tried to swallow. My lawyer picked up one page and tapped the signature line. The pencil impressions were clear under the light. Next to it, he laid down metadata logs showing edits made remotely from a device that wasn't mine. My advisor followed with a printout proving authorized attempts to access my records. The evidence formed a steady, undeniable line from their hands to their intentions. My daughter's voice cracked before she could form words. She tried to steady herself, then finally admitted she was trying to secure the house before he declines. She said it like it was logic, not betrayal. Like she was planning ahead, not taking advantage of a man still thinking clearly. The room felt smaller as her truth spilled into it. Her husband shifted beside her, his face tight with panic. He tried to blame her immediately, claiming he didn't know the details, that she told him it was all routine. But his earlier glances through my drawers, his constant presence, the phone calls, all of it sat between us, heavy and undeniable. His excuses collapsed under the weight of his own actions. I let them speak until there was nothing left to hide. The papers, the logs, the quiet intentions they thought I'd never see, it was all laid bare in the space where my wife's laughter used to echo. And in that heavy silence, their plan finally came apart. The next morning, my lawyer moved with the same steady precision he used in court. He filed reports documenting the forged signatures, the altered forms, and the coordinated attempts to take control of my property. There was nothing exaggerated in the paperwork, only dates, evidence, and the clear pattern of what had been done. The weight of those documents replaced any doubt I had left. Seeing everything organized in black and white made the betrayal sharper, more defined. By noon, formal restrictions were in place. My daughter and her husband were barred from accessing any of my financial or legal information. They couldn't request records, couldn't call on my behalf, couldn't touch anything tied to my accounts. My advisor placed protective notes across every institution I worked with, ensuring no one could make changes without my voice being heard directly. It was a simple set of steps, but each one felt like a barricade I should have built years earlier. Word spread through the family faster than I expected. Some called in disbelief, asking if I was sure, as if I hadn't lived the moments myself. Others reacted with anger, insisting I must have misunderstood. A few didn't call at all, silence from people who once filled my kitchen with noise. That silence stung more than the questions. It revealed who was willing to stand beside me and who preferred to look away when the truth became uncomfortable. When the house finally quieted again, I felt the weight of everything settle. Betrayal is not a sudden blow. It lingers, sits with you, and reshapes how you see the faces in your life. I walked through each room slowly, noticing the spaces where my daughter once stood offering help. The memory of her voice telling her husband, "He signs anything," echoed faintly, colder now under the truth. I spent the evening rebuilding the parts of my life I had allowed others to handle. I changed passwords, sorted files, tightened locks, and wrote down instructions no one else would touch. It wasn't just about safety, it was about reclaiming control inch by inch after realizing how easily it can slip through your hands when trust is misplaced. By nightfall, the house felt different. Not safer, not yet, but clearer. The boundaries were real now, no longer unspoken or assumed. Distance wasn't something I wanted, it was something I finally accepted as necessary, and in that quiet acceptance I felt the first small sense of relief. In the weeks that followed, I moved through my days with a steadier rhythm. I woke earlier, made my own breakfast, and sorted the mail myself. There was comfort in those simple routines, the ones I had let slip when I believed I needed more help than I actually did. My home felt different now, quieter, but also clearer. Each drawer, each document, each small decision reminded me that independence isn't measured by age, it's measured by awareness and boundaries. I found myself thinking often about how easily love can mask intentions. Families are built on trust, but trust can be used like a tool if you hand it over too freely. I replayed the moments where my daughter spoke for me, guided my hand toward papers, insisted I sign things just to make life easier. At the time, it felt like care. Now it felt like a slow reshaping of my life without my permission. That understanding didn't harden me. It simply sharpened the edges of what I allowed. I organized my documents again, this time with purpose. Every file had a place only I knew. My records were locked away, my passwords rewritten, my decisions documented in plain language. I kept a small notebook of instructions: who to call, what to avoid, which steps protected me most. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation, the kind that age and experience teach you to respect. Sometimes I sat at the dining table and looked at the folder my lawyer saved me from signing. His warning had come at exactly the right moment, delivered gently but firmly. Gratitude doesn't always come loudly, sometimes it sits quietly in the chest, steady and constant. Without that call, my life may have shifted into someone else's hands before I even realized the grip had tightened. I no longer assumed loyalty just because blood connected us. Love does not guarantee safety. It does not guarantee honesty. What it guarantees at best is hope, and hope is not protection. I learned to separate the affection I still carried from the boundaries I now held. Keeping distance didn't mean denying the past. It meant protecting the part of my future I still had the right to control. Evenings became lighter, calmer. I read more, walked more, let the house breathe in ways it hadn't in months. And as I settled into that peace, I understood the lesson clearly: a man's name, rights, and legacy must be guarded with the same quiet strength he once used to build them. Because in the end, no matter how much you love your family, the responsibility to protect your life will always fall to you, and you alone.